I found that really interesting, actually, and I'm on the board of a company called Vestergaard Fransen, which is a for-profit humanitarian development company in Lausanne, Switzerland. And it's interesting to hear what you say, because although humanitarian development is very far, in some respects, from what I do, the problems and the solutions are related to each other. And one of the businesses that Vestergaard Fransen has is, in terms of water and food sustainability, they sell carbon credits, and they link the issue to a way that a financing mechanism and so forth. So I think the technological and financial worlds are very integrated. Now, if any of the slides or things that I say to you this morning are of interest and you want a copy, I've got my email at the end of the presentation, so just shoot me an email. I'd be happy to send you a copy of the slides. But it is very great to be back in Cambridge. I did a junior year abroad, which in the States is the third year, in 1986, and I remember taking the train up from London to come up to Cambridge and just being in awe as the train was arriving in Cambridge. You know, for us Yanks, we love the United Kingdom in general, but Cambridge in particular. So it's always been good to come here and to see friends like Alan Barrell and Andy Richards and so forth, and to share with you some of our thoughts at Ariadne Capital, my views on the market. I'm going to talk about just 4 things this morning: following the entrepreneur, capital follows ideas, the new economy, and our cunning plan at Ariadne. Now, you might say, because I do say this a lot, I say we should follow the entrepreneur, and that's more than just a tagline. It's more than just a marketing campaign. It is really my personal thesis, if you will. I think that in society, we need to follow the entrepreneur. But if I were not speaking to a group like yourselves that is probably speaking a little bit to the converted, I find myself in audiences sometimes in the City of London or in other groups, or indeed with people who have nothing to do with the technological or financial worlds, and they said, why the heck should we follow the entrepreneur? I know some entrepreneurs. My cousin, my brother, my this, my that is an entrepreneur, and frankly, they're egotistical, self-centered, obsessed, paranoid people. I don't know why we should follow the entrepreneur. And I'm going to give you 2 reasons. First of all, this little guy, I love that little guy. That is the face of every entrepreneur. And they may not show you that face, but never ever forget that that's the face of the entrepreneur. 2 good reasons why we should follow that little guy is because they see the inevitable and advance the future. And that's the rational optimism of hanging out with entrepreneurs, of helping them build their businesses, is you see things, frankly, that should not happen, right? I'm going to share some examples of that in my presentation this morning. You see entrepreneurs, individuals, frankly, fairly ordinary people do extraordinary things and bring the future to us, and it is amazing to sit by their sides and to be part of that journey. And the second reason is they're willing to live abnormal lives. And let's face it, a lot of people aren't, right? They're willing to live obsessive lives to bring that future to us. And those are 2 good reasons in the broader context of what I'm going to talk to you about this morning, how society changes. The entrepreneur has a very useful role in society. So you might agree with my thesis that maybe we should follow the entrepreneur, but then I go on to say society works best when it's organized around the entrepreneur. So I want you to think about that for just a moment as well. Capital follows ideas, and this is one of the central themes of my new book that was published recently, Welcome to Entrepreneur Country. When I was 21 years old, I went to Paris right after graduation, and I remember as a 21-year-old showing up there with an English literature degree, no less, French minor, and lo and behold, France was not waiting for me with open arms. And I remember thinking in my early 20s, trying to break through, not really even having a plan for how I was going to break through and to create a proper livelihood and a business and a career and so forth. And I remember being, frankly, obsessed with having no money. And in so many respects, it's similar to sometimes the entrepreneurs that will come in to see us at Ariadne Capital, and they're obsessed with securing investment, with finding money. And they stay totally focused on that and forget about the business. But what I'm going to posit to you this morning is that capital has always followed ideas. It always has and it always will. And if you go back to the age of Christopher Columbus or the Medici family, the age of Michelangelo, Leonardo da Vinci. There's always been that class of people, the entrepreneur, the adventurer, the creators of that future, who bring the future to us, who live the abnormal lives. They've just been called different things throughout history. Sometimes they have been called the industrialists, sometimes they've been called the adventurers, the artists, and so forth. But the entrepreneurs, I refer to them as kind of the digital industrialists, the people who are leveraging the digital infrastructure today to create high-growth business. That's just an updated version of a very old thematic. And those people are the people that the capital providers, the financiers, that's their job to find. That's my job in my role as managing partner of the ACE Fund, is to find the best entrepreneurs and to back them. But there's been a problem, hasn't there? There's been a problem in that the financial services industry has kind of forgotten that it is a service industry to industry. It doesn't start the party. You don't get to, say that you're the big guy because you've got the big fund and you've got all the money. The really extraordinary person is the guy who has the idea, who's willing to live the abnormal life and to bring the future to us as a society. That's the guy that we need to be concerned about, right? That's why I say we need to follow the entrepreneur, and society works best when it's organized around the person, the entrepreneur, who has the disproportional impact on society moving forward and creating mass prosperity. So I like to put it into a historical context because for those of you that are in the room, it can feel very lonely being an entrepreneur. You can feel that you can't sometimes take steps forward until you have the money. But you need to wipe out that sense of, I can't move forward without the money. And I remember, again, when I was in my early 20s, being obsessed about having no money. And at one point, my boyfriend at the time said, Julie, stop. Stop worrying about the money. The money will find you. And I remember thinking that was the most absurd thing I had ever heard in my life. And I remember thinking, that's easy for you to say because you're older, wiser, more successful, all of this kind of stuff. And then I thought, Julie, that's the point. If he's telling you that, it's because that's how people get ahead. They don't worry. They assume that the money will find them if they're doing what they're meant to do, if they're focusing on their unique contribution, communicating and executing the ideas where they have an unfair advantage. That's how not only society moves forward, but that's how people create the impact in their world. But the venture capital community forgets that. The financial services industry certainly has forgotten that. And if we look throughout history, it's the Queen Isabellas who put Christopher Columbus on a retainer. It is the Medici family who puts the Leonardo da Vinci's on a retainer and takes them out of the market. That's the historical context that we need to remind ourselves of in looking at the entrepreneur today and the venture capitalists and the other private investors who are trying to find them. Capital is a heat-seeking missile. It's trying to find the opportunities for the best return, and that's the way to think of it. So, remember the new economy? Turns out it's only the latest version of new. Isn't that helpful? How many of you have heard of Carlota Perez? A couple. Not many. Carlota Perez is a Venezuelan economist who happens to do quite a lot of work in Cambridge. So she's based in Sussex, and she's written a very helpful book on the theory of disruptive technologies and adoption. And it's definitely worth you putting this on your reading list and finding it. I have yet, some of the smartest people I know have sworn by that book. So Carlota Perez is on your reading list. And she's very helpfully looked at the past couple of 100 years and looked at the technological revolutions. And it turns out that the new economy is only the latest version of new. Roughly every 50 to 60 years, there's a moment of disruptive technology. She refers to it as a big bang, which changes the direction and creates a whole new paradigm, a technological economic paradigm. And as you can see, some of those originated in Britain, some of those have originated in the United States, and so forth. And what happens as a result of those technological revolutions is the life cycle of that technological revolution. And she chronicles 4 distinct periods of that. You go through the first period where you have this big bang and early products and services, explosive growth and fast innovations. Then you move into a period where the finance overtakes and the finance gets very excited about making money out of money because there's almost not enough opportunity in the new economy. we're right there at the turning point between period 2 and period 3, which I'm going to talk to you more about. That second half, 3 and 4, are what she refers to as the deployment. So the first half is about the installation of new technologies. The second half is the deployment of those into existing business. Now, this 50-ish year cycle really starts in 1971. And interestingly, Carlotta went out to Silicon Valley in 1971 to look at the oil industry. She was a Venezuelan economist. You study oil if you're a Venezuelan economist. And she went out at the time of the OPEC's oil shocks and so forth. And lo and behold, the Big Bang, the Intel microprocessor, emerges in the market. And you have that huge disruptive force, which then leads to all of these well-known companies and many, many more, the first 2 periods, the installation of new technologies over the next 20 and 30 years. And then we're in that turning point as we move from it being all about the new thing and the entrepreneur taking over society and moving it into the deployment. So the revolution starts as a small fact with a big promise, but it moves to become a significant force in the market. Now, again, I know that I'm kind of talking to the converted here by virtue of showing up at a technological venturing conference. You guys know a lot about what's going on. But if you think about the average citizen in this country or the United States or Greece, pick your country, the average citizen, I'm not sure, is able to put into a proper context what's happening in society right now. We are moving from the equivalent of the horse to the car. And this is a natural thing. This happens every 50 to 60 years. There are other things going on in the market as well. But we are now moving through this turning point into the deployment in large industry. So the Big Bang attracts new investment, and it is the successful radical innovations they receive and promise extraordinary profits in a mature industrial landscape. So that installation period. And what's important is that fourth bullet point, a new context is being created. A new common sense is emerging. And I view that as our role as people who understand these things, working in the technological industry, working in venture capital, to communicate that to the rest of society, that this new common sense is normal. This is what happens every 50 to 60 years. The job that you will have tomorrow, Mr. Unemployed, is going to be different than the job that you had previously. This is a natural order of things. And that economic, institutional, technological change just continues to interact with each other as we go through the 50 or 60-year cycle. So what that means in kind of fairly simplistic language, I remember when I came up to London from where I was at the time doing business school at INSEAD, and I set up a business called, first of all, I did some internet deals with new media investors, lastminute.com, WGSN, and ArtCores, but then I set up a business called First Tuesday. It was a network of entrepreneurs. And I remember the entrepreneurs that would come to First Tuesday events, which eventually kind of went all over the world, frankly, they felt like they were technological revolutionaries. They thought that they were going to just take on the large established business and, name your big company. They were going to assassinate and annihilate them, and it was all going to be new. And it didn't really happen that way, did it? But there was a sense that David with his slingshot was going to kill Goliath, right? And some of those Davids became the new big Davids or Goliaths and so forth. But overall, there were some new entrants. The technologies were installed, but it got way out of control. What's happened today is a very different thing. I don't think this is a moment of disruptive technology at all. In fact, when people come to see us at Ariadne Capital and they say, we need $4 million for some great piece of disruptive technology, we say, actually, we're not the people that you need to talk to. We don't believe that that's what's happening. We don't talk about disruptive technologies. We think that over the past kind of 13 years, those disruptive technologies based around the web, based around the microprocessor, have slowly just been embedded into our lives, right? Despite the dot-com bust, despite the crisis of, financial crisis of 08, 09, and so forth, did anybody stop using broadband or mobile technologies? No, they just continued to roll out more and more into our lives. And today we find ourselves in a very different situation in terms of how David and Goliath need to collaborate with themselves. And I would say they need to dance. The social and economic institutions are in the process of pulling in technologies and transforming themselves, the winners, into high-growth businesses because of the new technologies and business models. So as we move through this knowledge economy, this 50 to 60-year cycle, which is based around the digital infrastructure, the knowledge economy, in the deployment half of it and so forth, the institutional creative destruction starts to happen now. And sure enough, we see British businesses, because we're extremely good at financial services innovation in this country, companies like Monetize, which I'm going to tell you about a little bit later, are now worth more than $500 million. This is a company that didn't exist 9 years ago. This is a company which has been backed by Visa 5 times, listed on the London Stock Exchange, operating on 4 continents. Every 20 seconds, somebody in the world is using Monetize for mobile banking. Funding Circle you probably heard about, with investors like Charles Dunstone, Ed Ray, the founder of Betfair. Zopa, peer-to-peer lending, started 7 years ago, the peer-to-peer lending market. And Wonga, which despite its payday loans niche, is actually doing more to revolutionize real-time lending and will be a huge disruptive force in retail banking. So we can look at those and say those are the entrepreneurs, but actually what's happening is that the process of capitalism, the creative destruction, which is what capitalism is all about, is hitting the financial services industry. These businesses will do more to change the Goliaths than the Goliaths can ever do on their own. So given all of that, what's the investment opportunity? So we think pretty deeply about this kind of historical context, about the role of the entrepreneur, but also the role of Goliath, given where we are in this cycle. And we have a cunning plan. We think that innovation is about economics, not technology. Otherwise, we'd all be flying the Concorde. We're not. We're stuffed into jumbo jets, aren't we? So if there's one kind of basic idea that I want you to take away from, and it seems quite obvious, but there is a fundamental network orientation to all of business today. If you're still thinking linear or hierarchical in any way, shape, or form in the way that you interact with your suppliers, your customers, and so forth, really encourage you to update your thinking. Everything operates on the basis of networks today. And so what that means, as I describe again in my book, Welcome to Entrepreneur Country, is ecosystem economics is what we think is the new industrial model. And what that means in practice is that you have natural allies. And most people, as they're trying to bring products and services to market, whether it's a Goliath trying to go to market or a David, they don't do the natural allies exercise. They think that they're going to harness all their, organize their people, mobilize their resources, and go to market. They don't think, who are my natural allies? In whose interest is it for me to be successful? How can I organize a set of incentives, economic or otherwise, to be pulled into the market? And everything is about creating pull. If you find yourself in your business pushing and thinking, this is damn hard, why is it not working? It's because you're pushing. You're not pulling. You're not being pulled into the market. And natural allies sometimes they're unsexy companies. They can be companies that have lost their way. They can be adjacent businesses that you formerly thought of as competitors. They can be new entrants. But there's always a set of companies or individuals or entities in any market where it's in their interest to pull you into the market. And I'm going to tell you how Monetize did that. So we work within that ecosystem economics framework in everything that we do at Ariadne. Now, if we think about Google for just a moment, because it's one of the biggest Goliaths out there, Google say that they organize the world's information. They actually do quite a lot more than that. They organize the economics of the world's information. And I and you, as a consumer of their search, am not given any economic upside in the search transaction. And it's rather actually stunning when you stop to think about that for just a moment. They use our data, albeit aggregated and anonymously, and they give us nothing. We get free search. Isn't that great? But they've created a multi-billion-pound business. So clearly there's some value to that data because they've created a multi-billion-pound business on the back of that. And I've thought for a very long time that their biggest Achilles heel is if someone in the search space were to cut a different set of economics for the consumer. Now, I found that entrepreneur. His name is John Paleomalites. He's a British entrepreneur, and he built a business called Beat That Quote. And Beat That Quote were giving a cashback deal, amongst other things, very clever, but a cashback deal for the use of people's economic data, their personal data. They were giving an economic upside in that through a cashback mechanism. Now, Google acquired that business. We sold it to Google after 21 months of negotiation last year for 122 times EBITDA multiple. Now, why does Google buy a company for 122 times EBITDA multiple, except if it's cutting to the heart of their business model? It's true that John is a very smart guy, and he's now running globally their business and financial services price comparison. There's no question about the talent. But for a company with £250,000 of EBITDA, to pay nearly 40 million sterling is quite a premium, right? Now, frozen. There we go. Monetize is a company that we have been advising and have an equity stake in, founded by Alistair Lukes. How many of you have heard of Monetize? More hands, that's good. You're going to hear a lot about Monetize, not only because they are completely disrupting some of the largest companies in the world, companies like Western Union, etc., but they have created the mobile money ecosystem over the past 9 years. And what Monetize does, very simply, Alistair's premise was your money is in your bank account, right? You don't want to move the money to a PayPal account. You don't want to move it anywhere. That's what banks are for. They have money. Let's enable those banks, not disrupt them. Let's enable the banks to get into the world of mobile money, right? Back to David and Goliath dancing, social and economic institutions embracing new technologies. And so what Alistair started off with, he said something very simple at the beginning. He said, all I need to do is to get the top 4 mobile operators and the top 4 banks to adopt, monetize, and then presto bingo, it'll work. That unbelievable, the optimistic statements of a young David. But he also said something more important. He said, if this is going to work, mobile money, the mobile money ecosystem, it has to work for everyone, right? Think about that. It sounds dead obvious, sounds very simple. But how many times do you hear an entrepreneur say, if this is going to work, it has to work for everybody in the ecosystem? So what Alistair and his team did is they set about organizing the economics for the industry. Now, there were a lot of other companies out there. SimPay went bust, more or less, at the same time that Monetize emerged. And there's lots of banking software companies that are trying to sell linearly into banks. But it takes a lot of work to create a set of economics for the industry. It takes a lot of work to do that. And you are, as I'm going to show you, profoundly vulnerable if you do that. But what Monetize do is they sit in the middle and they just take a transaction, a cut of every transaction that goes through their ecosystem. So they've now flipped through and have moved from that vulnerability that you, in a network-oriented world, you start in a profound place of vulnerability if you're going to organize the economics for your ecosystem. But what Monetize have done over the past 9 years, have moved to a place of profound network effects. So the David and Goliath grid model is my entire business. And I put it to you because I think it explains a lot about how things are going to, who the winners and losers are going to be and how you go to market. David, or we refer to the Davids, the entrepreneurs out there, as digital enablers. These digital enablers are hugely valuable to the Goliaths out there who provide, amongst other things, distribution. Because no venture capitalist is going to give 50 million sterling to help a young David digital enabler technology entrepreneur acquire 50 million customers. He or she is going to have to do a deal with Goliath. That might be a deal with Apple, it might be a deal with Facebook, it might be a deal with Google. Part of what we try to do is to help a lot of the Goliaths open themselves up to become open enterprise platforms so they can deal with David, and that we don't allow just the big software companies to just continue to take over the rest of all industry. So Goliath has a role. He's got an asset. He's got distribution. He's got scale, reach, brand, and so forth. But most investment bankers just tell the Goliaths, go buy stuff, right? Just say, go buy stuff. Most of the management consultants just tell Goliath, you're not that smart and so forth, so go set up a fund and do things. But what Goliath needs to do is figure out how to engage with David. He needs to learn how to interact with David, because David understands ecosystem economics. He understands it's all about the consumer data. Back to John Palumolaitis and beat that quote. He understands that network orientation, that these transactions are being done in a very different way. And David has the obsession and crazed, kind of psychotic optimism to believe that he can get from that point of vulnerability and move across the grid to those profound network effects. And some entrepreneurs, like John Paleomolites that beat that quote, create huge strategic value, and they still get acquired. 37.7 million sterling is not bad for a business with 250,000 pounds of EBITDA. So he created huge strategic value for Google and got a pretty good payday, but you might not say that was huge financial value. Other entrepreneurs, like Alistair Lukey's at Monetize, have moved further across that grid. And as they cross that central point and they start really bringing those digital revenues and the lean operating system to the banks, to the visas, etc., they tip into network effects that are profound. And so you move from this very vulnerable position to this bringing a tight network benefit to the industry and having a role as the operating system of the industry, as the industry architect. So in 2012, network benefits accrue to those firms who understand their role in their ecosystem and organize the economics for it. This in turn leads to exceptional returns for their shareholders. So the Ariadne platform will help to build some of these new ecosystems. We advise some of the Goliaths in those sectors. We have a fund which invests in the Davids called the ACE Fund. And then we've got something called Entrepreneur Country, which again I describe in my book, Welcome to Entrepreneur Country. And we provide those kinds of services. We call it, very scientific term, the bear hug. So we provide that bear hug to companies that are David and Goliath, and that's how we're trying to help those new digital ecosystems win. So another view, the 3 different businesses that we have. We've got 60 founding investors, people like the founders of Betfair, Hotmail, Qualcomm, etc. And these are some of our limited partners in our fund, entrepreneurs like John Redford here in Cambridge, board members of Roche Pharmaceuticals, and so forth. So it's all about entrepreneurs backing entrepreneurs. Everything that we do is about entrepreneurs helping the next generation of entrepreneurs go to market. These are some of the explosive growth companies that we've worked with over the past 11 somewhat years that we've been in existence. And this is my new book. And I'm just a moment on the book because you could say, well, that's all, again, very good. Follow the entrepreneur, great. Society works best if you follow the entrepreneur, etc. But the conclusion that I came, and the reason why I wrote the book over the past year, was that I really think that we're all going to entrepreneur country. It's not just the entrepreneurs. We're all going to entrepreneur country. Why? Because there is no money in the system. The entrepreneurs create the money. Right? So we need to get back to basics to create those new industries, to create those new businesses. And entrepreneurs are willing to live the abnormal lives, to bring the future to us. And they create that revenue, of which some portion of it goes to the Treasury's coffers, which drives the rest of society. But Goliath, as I've been saying, needs to dance with David. He does that by going to entrepreneur country. Goliath thinks that he's playing that game of asymmetrical warfare, and David has to come over to his side of the game. But actually what happens is that this young David with his slingshot actually pulls Goliath in to this new world, which is the second half of Carlota Perez's 50, 60-year paradigm. I call that entrepreneur country. I think society is in the process of being reshaped by the entrepreneur and his or her vision of society. But